Well, initially surprised, but then when you think about it in the context of what's been going on in the last month with the Saudi-Iran talks that were brokered by the Chinese, it sort of makes some sense as to why they might want to explore this. That said, there's a considerable amount of challenge they're going to face if they want to actually be able to pursue that. So I think when it comes to the Iran-Saudi talks, one of the most important things I think that's notable there was that there was already a process in place. So the last 2 years, the Iraqis and the Omanis have been providing a back channel between the Saudis and the Iranians to talk to each other. And when the Chinese hosted those talks last month, it was very much at the end of that process. If we're comparing that to what's going on with Israel-Palestine, I mean, we have basically a frozen conflict. We have a process that hasn't been in operation for years. I mean, yes, there is security coordination between the Israelis and Palestinians, but that's about it. Beyond that, there's very little dialogue, very little mediation going on. And so for the Chinese to say, well, we're going to come in and do something about this, it raises a lot more questions. There's a number of ways you can look at this. So, obviously we don't know what's going on sort of within sort of the decision-making halls in Beijing. I mean, there could be various possibilities here. So we know that, for example, there is a new foreign minister in China, and the previous one has sort of taken on a more sort of overarching role. So there could be a possibility here that the new foreign minister wants to make his mark. There is, of course, yes, you're quite right. There is this sort of sense of China wanting to become more involved and to sort of to put its weight about a bit. And certainly when you think about the context of the Middle East, this is a region where the Americans have been very, very predominant. And so this could be a way of the Chinese saying, look, America's time is over. Chinese may want to indicate an interest in doing this, and as I've said, there's obviously sort of a broader geopolitical factor in there, sort of highlighting sort of America being somewhat weaker and not being very effective at this. But also, it's a reminder. The fact that the media is paying attention to this and is talking about this, is pretty much all that the Chinese really need. And if you then go to the Palestinian side, the Palestinians have been consistent in always wanting to open up the process. They've always wanted to have more international involvement in the peace negotiations, because in their view, greater international involvement will put pressure on the Israelis, which leaving it to the Americans alone doesn't happen. But of course, the Israelis are aware of this, and given that they are, the stronger party in this conflict, they are in a position where currently the benefits, such as they are, outweigh the costs. There's no desire to move away from that. If the Chinese were to become involved, you would imagine that they would want to see a more sort of equitable exchange, some attempt at, Israel would really have to make concessions. Since the Oslo Accords were first signed in 1993, we've now had nearly 30 years now of changing, of developments happening on the ground. So the way that things are actually far more complicated than this simple two-state solution suggests in 2014. The last point to make as well is why I don't think the Chinese are very. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And of course, the Americans have been hitting heads on this for the last 30 years, and they've not succeeded. So why should the Chinese succeed where the Americans have not done so? That actually has repercussions for Chinese credibility. If the Chinese can't actually achieve peace, that would undermine its stature in the regions.
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.